Good morning. My name is Ken Rubin. I'm one of the co-chairs of the OMG Healthcare Task Force, and I've got the privilege to spend a few minutes here with Dr. Ed Hammond. Ed's the director of the Duke Center for Informatics and somewhat of a legend in the health informatics circles, so appreciate your taking the time to be with us today and this week at the OMG. So I know you were, we'd invited you to give a bit of a talk at the Business Process Management for Health workshop yesterday, and I'd be interested in your impressions of the overall event and where you see that fitting in the broader context of health.
Well, I think it's typical of quite a few of the activities I've been involved with. It's a great series of great ideas, but they're kept almost in a silo from the rest of the world. And one of the things I'll take away from the meeting yesterday was the fact that there are some very important tools that you've developed, some concepts that you developed that I think have application in a broader setting. And so one of the things that I hope to do is to take some of the things that I've learned back to HL7 as well as to my own work at Duke and use it in some of the things that we're doing.
That's terrific. Was there a particular takeaway from the day that really impressed you or left an impression?
It's a new set of people. And again, I've always thought that informatics has no boundaries. It really does go across all sorts of professions. As an engineer working in a medical profession, I've been acutely aware of those distinctions, and it really does take equality across multiple professions to do what we're trying to do. And it really shouldn't be one group talking to another group. It shouldn't be clinicians talking to technologists. It really should be the two working together with different backgrounds, solving common problems. And I think I saw some of that yesterday in the differences of the people that were attending the sessions that I participated in and asking different questions, but from different perspectives. So I see a merging.
That's a really good insight. You've had an extensive career around informatics and in HL7 in particular. As I was thinking back over some of HL7's accomplishments, I was wondering if there was any particular accomplishment in the last 10 or 20 years out of HL7 that you're particularly proud of and why that one stands out.
Well, within HL7,
yeah.
I think the thing that I am the proudest of is, I guess, two things, one of which is bringing a broader community together. I really was very much involved in bringing the people that were the originals of CDA, for example, bringing that group into HL7, but a number of other clinical groups are brought into HL7. So the thing that I really have done is be an ambassador to multiple groups, including the international community. I think the international community has positives. It has had some cons in doing that, and we still are trying to learn how to mix that community to get together. But the word international to me is a series of countries that are working together, and I've replaced that now with the word global, because I really think that we should start working without those boundaries. And so part of what I'm doing in HL7 is bringing that community together, but I'm very much involved in the international community itself, going to both Europe and Asia, and knowing those people very well and looking at some of the things that they're dealing with and trying to bring that group together and sharing the same. I think there's too much to do it individually. So I think what I would say mostly is bringing groups together. The other thing is HL7 has really become a family to me, and truthfully, when I go to those meetings, I really feel the love of that community, and that's extremely important to me. And my wife, Kay, who was very much involved in part of that community, and HL7 has really been a wonderful family for me.
That's terrific. That's fantastic, and I've had a taste of the HL7 community, and I understand what you're talking about. So let's pull on that kind of international or global thread for a minute. So often when healthcare is discussed or health IT is discussed in the U.S., people tend to stay in the U.S. context, and at least in my experience, it's rare that we look kind of beyond our boundaries. So drawing on your experience, I know you've spoken in many places here and abroad. Are there any specific examples of health IT or systems or initiatives that are happening, outside of our country borders that are of potential relevance or significance that we would be well served to take a look at?
Well, I think we are well served to take a look at almost everywhere because they're different problems and they're dealt with in different ways. Over the years, we've learned from the Netherlands, which I think is really probably a remarkable country in what they've done. It's relatively small, but they've really put together groups that are working at the country level. Denmark has some good things, Sweden, Finland, you name the countries, and Italy now is one of the countries that really is doing some significant activities and using health IT and bringing that community together. Australia, the UK, New Zealand, Korea, Japan, they have ups and downs, and I think that's one of the things that I have paid a great deal of attention to, is when do the countries come up and when do the countries go down? What are they focused on? Denmark, for example, I guess this is in their fourth evolution. And my questions to some of the people is, do you learn from each of the evolution, each of the different systems that come into place? Do you learn anything from them? And I argued the answer was mostly no, although the current generation is looking back to the first generation involving the same people. So I think we don't learn from the past as much as we should. Now, I think the UK is the same way. The UK, the beautiful contribution of the UK to the US is we used them as an example when they were at their heyday with National Health Services and what they were doing, because they were spending a large amount of money in using IT across the country, and they were doing some good things. And then they had a change of government, and it totally disappeared. Now they're beginning to restart that again. But one of the things over the years that I have tried to do is to say, when you start a project, you should make sure that funding is available for the entire project. Don't do it on a year-to-year basis. And I think the DoD and the VA are perfect examples of where they've had some great ideas with sufficient funding, but it's on a year-to-year basis, and the next year it's a different set of people making those decisions. So I think those are the kind of issues that we need to deal with. We really need almost as much as possible make the funding of the research and the development of systems that we're doing independent of the government's ability of changing the amount of money available from year to year.
So that's a really nice segue into one of the other questions I was thinking about asking you. How do you envision, so we're obviously at a time of significant change, especially relative to the government in the US. What do you see as the government's role, in your view, if you could advise how and to what extent should the government get involved in the IT, either picking standards or incentivizing, or what do you think is the best approach?
I think that's a great question. Is if the government could make the right decisions, which is an impossibility, I would think the government should mandate what's really going to happen. But the fear of making the right decision tells me that the government should be involved but shouldn't have the sole voice in terms of what really is happening. It needs to be a balance. If you try to do something without the government, you're going to not be successful, you're going to fail. If you try to do something exclusively with the government, you're going to fail. So it needs to be a working relationship. But we need to identify the right group to make the right decisions at the right time and put that together again. So the role of the government, I think, is one of really helping to bring the people together that make those decisions. I often thought if I had been appointed to the job of ONC, the first thing I would do is identify who had the technical know-how, the power to make the change, and bring them in and say, you could disagree with what I'm proposing, but you have to tell me a solution that solves the problem. So it's not just that will work, it has to be a replacement for what will work. And I think those are the kind of dialogues that we really haven't had. There's always been a vested interest for the next step rather than looking at the long-term goals of what you're trying to do and pick the talents to achieve those goals.
So let's pick at that a little bit. So So let's assume that we could make that right decision, and in the past the government has certainly mandated certain things. One of the challenges that I think recurs is those decisions are point in time. So we end up dropping an anchor on a particular technology, and then 10 or 15 years we're still stuck with that particular choice when the market has moved. How do you address that?
And part of the talk that I made was recognizing that when I first started in the fields, before it even became informatics, we had time to do things. Technology, particularly computers, were the weak spot. And the fact that we have a gold star that we put on the wall, the first time that the computer stayed up all day long, for one day, it never went down, and so we have a gold star that we put on the wall for them. That world has changed a great deal now.
When did that gold star go on the wall?
It was probably around 1971 or 72, working with 4K of main memory. I guess it was a Link 8 that later became a PDP 8. But one of the things that I would say is you learn to be a very good programmer when that's all you had to work with. And I used to tell my students they should have to go back to those kind of constraints, and they really would learn how to program. No matter how much storage and speed you have, you always need to do something that's going to be used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It needs to be the best it can be, and not worry about the fact that technology gets you out of trouble. So I think that's a very important thing to remember as we move ahead.
Maybe I could shift the dialogue a little bit to the current health IT landscape. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing the industry right now?
The biggest challenges facing?
For health IT. So what are the biggest challenges for the health IT market, or what are some of the biggest opportunities?
It's interesting because it really is an aging market in some ways. And the universal use of a product now really constrains the ability to change it quickly. And so what we do, and some of the basic technology goes back really 50 or 60 years now of the systems that have been built, and you add new things on it. It's like you're adding fringe, but you're still keeping the older foundation of what you're doing. And things have changed so much. We need a way of getting rid of the old and allowing the new to come in. I jokingly say what we need is Noah's flood to come into the IT market so that we can get rid of everything that's happening. If you look at some of the significant changes over that period of time, they've really been the opportunity of starting from scratch again, because they've abandoned it, they've thrown everything out, and you start fresh again, and you have a huge amount of freedom that you don't have. And I think there's a significant transition now as we really are moving outside the institution with healthcare and engaging that full community with lots of new devices. So how we move in that direction and do the transition from the in-house computation and power and everything else to moving outside, and how we change that, the focus and the boundary of what we're doing. So the biggest problem is understanding how to do that in an effective way that doesn't destroy everything that we've done up until now.
So how do you see the role of the individual patient and patient engagement, affecting, that landscape?
It's, I can testify personally to the role that I've played and how I've transitioned through a number of issues. I think that a set of people start paying a lot more attention to what's happened to them and doing the right kind of things, behavior modification. There's still a segment that really doesn't pay attention to behavior modification, and somehow we need to begin to recognize that. When I was a kid, we didn't have to go jogging because our daily life was so much walking and working and everything else. We got the exercise that we needed. We could eat 3 meals a day. But now sitting at a desk for much of the day, if I ate 3 meals a day, I would be pretty good size. And so I have to discipline myself. to do the exercising that I need to do and the food that I need to do. But I think an increasing number of people are becoming very much aware of the significance of behavior to health, and I would love to see it be everybody. I still find it amazing that we have kids in high school that still start smoking. So there are a lot of things that we know you shouldn't do that people are still doing, and we need to get smart enough to be able to make that not cool.
So let me shift back to HL7 for a little bit, and one of the hottest specifications going, pun intended, is the fire activity, and that's certainly been gaining in popularity and really penetrating into the market. What do you see as the future of fire?
Well, the first thing I would say is that for a standard to be globally used, it has to be something that you can easily explain to somebody who doesn't know anything about standards. And I must confess, with version 3, it was a very complex standard, and it was extremely difficult to explain to the average person what this standard was all about. I think fire goes back to almost version 2. The beautiful part about version 2 is it simply was a line that you put specific kind of things in, and you could tell that to an audience that understood what you're talking about. Fire is very much the same way. I really view fire as being version 2 in the 21st century. Like, you can explain exactly where you put things. I think fire, if we can manage to control the use of extensions so that I don't have an infinite number of ways of sending the same data, fire will be successful. It really needs to be totally constrained. We need to have rules of the road as we do in highways, interstates, or at sea. We need to have rules that everybody follows. And it's easier to do it yourself than to look for what someone else has done. We need to change that thought, so that the first thing I do is look, if somebody else has done it, I take it and build on it. But it's long ago, there was one of the computer companies that said, we use HL7 plus. And I had a big sign that said, put the word standard and put an X to it. When you extend it, you are defeating the purpose of a standard. And somehow we have to get that thought across. Standards can't be frozen, because we continue to want to do new things, new ways of doing it. It has to have that dynamic aspect of it, but it needs to be done in a controlled fashion. So I think fire has a great deal of potential. The Fire Applications Roundtable was something that I pushed forward with HL7, because I said it has more hype than it has reality, and what we need to do is to begin to develop a pathway that will let us show the reality of what currently exists and move ahead with that. And I think the application roundtable does exactly that. People are now beginning to use it, and again, I think the challenge is sharing, is be aware what other people are doing, because everything has common factors. I think that's one of the things at this meeting that I've been looking at to see the different levels of application. So whether it's healthcare or whether it's transportation, there's the need of moving something from one place to the other, and why not use the same standard for doing that? So again, I think that it isn't just healthcare that we're talking about.
So pulling on that idea of extensions, one of the things that really struck me in your talk yesterday was this perspective that the electronic health record becomes really just the repository, the store of that information in such a way that it can be stored, accessed, consumed, sliced, diced, maintaining that meaning, and everything else kind of falls outside of the EHR. Would you kind of comment on what does that software stack look like in your mind in the coming years if we were to evolve to that model of an EHR as the record?
Well, if you won't tell anybody I said it, it really goes back to the original EHR that me and my group developed. Because one of the things, as a consequence of a slower processing speed, is that if you spend a great deal of time looking for data, you wouldn't find it in a time that made the user accept it. And so when I first started designing the electronic health record, I made each encounter be a file. And if I wanted to look at multiple across encounters, I had to keep retrieving the different stacks. There are people that are doing today electronic health records as if each encounter is a folder and you look through it. But when I had to do something as simple as to calculate a body mass index, I needed a height and a weight. Typically, height for an adult at least was measured once and not every single visit, certainly not recorded,
Sure.
whereas weight may be recorded at every visit. And so if I had to go hunt the last height, it took more time than I wanted to spend. And so I solved that by putting the last value of anything that's ever been in the system in a particular spot. So not only could I find the last height immediately, if nobody had ever recorded a height, I knew it immediately. And so that's the kind of infrastructure that I need. And I think it's rather interesting. I think both the language that we wrote as part of the electronic health record that we developed then, and I think that characteristic really is true with MUMPS, is the language, the MUMPS language was part of the database. And I think the language that we developed, called Gamish, was part of the TMR database. So the language was manipulation of the data within that. I think that's the kind of approach we need to take out and put in. And I think particularly as genomics begin to be part of the electronic health record, we need to create an infrastructure for storing of genetic information and a language to deal with that lets us look exactly where we need to look. So part of that, and again, you know, it's from the perspective of outside. I don't care if there are multiple files. It should all be in that one box. So there shouldn't be patient data, clinical data that's scattered over several different areas under several different controls. My belief in part of that model is all of that goes within what I call the EHR, but its total function is taking data in and putting data out, and the functionality all exists outside of that.
So what do you see as creating that innovation layer on top of that? Where do you see that happening in the industry? So right now, where most of the EHR products are self-contained, everything's in the box, and at least from my experience, those third-party plugins and innovation on top of that has been a bit of a challenge, and I think FHIR's serving to change some of that landscape, as are some of the specifications the OMG is working on. How do you see that affecting things moving forward?
I think it'll be interesting to see if we can convince some of the major EHR vendors to do this. I mean, they can still keep their total product. They just partitioning it differently. But if I can get personal about this, I've had this conversation with my friend Bill Stead at Vanderbilt, and Bill is just putting Epic into Vanderbilt, and I said, how are you going to continue to do the things that you're doing? And shared my vision with him, and he says what we're doing is consistent with what your vision is. Basically what they're doing is using Epic simply to collect the data as part of the collection of that, and they're moving it immediately into their own EHR environment. You can call it a data warehouse or whatever you want to call it. So all the functionality that they developed over the last several years, which is significant, will still work because you're moving it into a place of getting access to that. Now that's a step, that's a way around a problem instead of solving the fundamental problems, but that's certainly a step in that direction. I would love to see the vendors begin to recognize the value of that, because significantly we are doing clinical decision support of taking data out of the electronic health record and doing some manipulation with it, but getting some important new pieces of data that we want to put back into the electronic health record, because the next time the patient comes in, I want to be able to access that. So it needs to be part of the EHR in the same way if it were a laboratory instrument, we should think of CDS as being almost like a laboratory instrument of creating new data that becomes part of the EHR. And the system needs to be able to accommodate that.
That's great. I just have two more questions, and then we'll let you get back to the other things you're up to. I guess first is if you have a young professional that's heading into this career path and just starting to embark down the healthcare road, what advice would you give them, or a company that's trying to get into this space?
Well, I think two things. One of which is there's no such thing as impossible. There are things that may take me a lifetime to learn how to do, but over the years, I've had challenges that I didn't know how to solve immediately. But then this challenge would come up from a different perspective, and I begin to understand how to solve it. But if you can understand that there is a need for this, then don't ever say you can't do it. Just keep at it. So I think the art of the possible is infinite. Is the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is there's nothing new under the sun, and I think that I have been lucky that I've never focused on a single area itself. As an electrical engineer, as a biomedical engineer, as a medical informatician, I've continued that movement. And I'm, even at this meeting, I'm looking at other areas and understanding something else is happening here that can be applied to what I'm doing. And I would say keep an open eye. There's nothing that is not important, and you can learn something from almost everything. So it's a broad vision, and believe everything is possible, and have fun.
Yeah, that's terrific. And then the last question, and you actually started to go there, really goes to the nature of the relationship between HL7 and the OMG, since this is for an OMG audience. Is there anything you'd like to say about how that relationship has unfolded, and how do you see the strength of that partnership now?
Well, to some extent, I think getting me here opened my eyes to some of the things that's happened. I was part of the group that started the clinical interoperability council, and again, I'm trying to bring in clinicians, recognizing that the minute we started talking like we talk to each other, the clinicians go out the door. And so we had to have a way of not using the acronyms, not using the words, and relating to them. And I remember back to the early days of my life when I would take a big piece of white wrapping paper and draw what I wanted to do on it and have the conversations with clinicians to go back to that same model again. And it turned out the domain analysis model, using a product, a UML, was a way of really doing that. And then I would identify the data elements that they were using, and it was really interesting. We were having some early conversations, and I would say, okay, there are 3 tests that you can do. Tell me what the decision rule for each of those tests. And frequently, I don't know, I just do it. But I'm saying that can't be true. You obviously have a way of selecting this. And that was a way of beginning to communicate and understanding the flow. And so we had a hard time within HL7 convincing them the domain analysis models was legitimate activity. Now there are a number of groups that are doing domain analysis models, but they're more static. And when you have sub-events that can happen that influence what's happening. So what I learned yesterday is the fact that you all have developed some tools. So I'd love to see some education from the OMG folk coming into the HL7 and saying these are some of the tools that we've developed, and then having, back to my answer to your other question, and 2 groups working together on a single problem, taking what you know about some of the modeling that you've done, the business modeling that you've done, taking what we have brought in from some of the clinical flow data, putting those together, and we're going to have a much stronger product. Again, I always think that Don Lindbergh, who was the head of National Library of Medicine, probably in the early 70s, came and visited Duke and looked at what we were doing with DMR. And he said, much of what Ed is doing is not brand new. What he's done is put together what everybody else is doing in the most effective way he's seen. And to me, that's positive. I mean, I thought that was wonderful praise of looking to see what people are doing and then understand how to fit that into what you're doing rather than redoing it again. And for me, that's exactly what I have learned from this trip. And I will go back to the CIC group and try to set up the stage of where we bring people in. There's too much to do to be competitive, and I just think it's a useless exercise. It's tough because everything we do is competitive, including basketball, but couldn't go without making that comment. But
well, one of our affiliated universities has a team that's still playing.
Yes.
So.
But it's there are times you need to change the level of competition, and if somebody is smarter than you, take what they're doing and then compete at this level, and you keep getting better and better and better, rather than trying to go back and reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and from the OMG side, I think we've worked very closely with HL7 and certainly want to continue to do so. And it sounds like we both have some homework.
You've played a major role because you've participated in both groups. But it's tough when you're fighting for people, you're fighting for money, you're fighting for recognition. But I've always felt it comes to you if you do what you want to be doing.
That's terrific. Hey, thank you so much for making the time.
Great.
Take care.
Yeah.